Hello, and welcome to the LVP Architects podcast. Before we start, these podcasts are very light, bite-sized podcasts, and they're intentionally so because you still need to do quite a lot of research in your own right. You need to understand it, but hopefully these podcasts are guiding you in the right direction and giving you a bit more of an understanding of what sort of areas you need to focus in. And not to get too stressed about things, because it can seem overwhelming if you haven't had the experience or all of the experience. So in this podcast, talking a little bit about handover and defects period. Now, again, this discussion is more focused at the case study, exam and interview, because you can go into much more depth, and there are books that go into greater depth for all of these subjects that these podcasts cover. But I think it can be quite overwhelming, and these books can be quite hard going at times. For me personally, they were. So these podcasts are little snippets of what I would have liked to have had when I did my part 3. And I think would be useful for most people. I hope you agree. So on that note, we'll start. Handover. Handover occurs in stage 6 of the Reba Planner works. And handover is quite a critical point because, as we mentioned in previous podcasts, as soon as that building and site is handed over, the responsibility of that falls to the client, unless it's a specific D&B where the contractor not only builds but they maintain it and they lease it back, so there are certain procurement routes that will allow that. In general situations, handover is the end of one thing and the beginning of the other. It ends the contractor's site and building responsibility in terms of health and safety, and that starts with the client. So they are now legally responsible for everything that happens. But it does begin defects period. So defects period is usually, I think by default, can either be 6 to 12 months, depending on the scale of the project. But in some contracts, you can amend it to be longer or shorter, whatever you want. And defects period, the intention is that it's kind of like a settling in period. So the user of the building or users of the building, get to test run it. So basically what it allows for is a settling in period. So any defects that may happen are likely to happen in that first year. So if there are the roof leaks, if there are leaks in pipework or whatever it is, you're more likely to discover it earlier on. And the defects period is for these defects to be highlighted, and the main contractor is obligated to come back and repair them at no additional cost as well. That's the key thing. Now, at handover, what happens is, to get to that point, you would have gone through quite a lot of certifications depending on your building contract, interim payments, practical completion to get to handover. So what that signifies is final payment up to that point minus the retention fee. Now, retention fee is very important. Retention fee can vary in its percentage. I think it's usually about 5% of the construction cost of the project. And the intention of that is a pot of money that one keeps the main contractor wanting to come back to repair any defects to then get that final retention fee. But 2, should the main contractor go defunct, or should the main contractor refuse to repair those defects, then that pot of money can be used to appoint another contractor to come and fix the problem. And the retention fee money is used in the exam about a scenario based around that period of time. So it's important to know those key sort of steps. So again, if you're a contract administrator, what the process is that need to be done of notifying the main contractor that there is a defect. What's the time period? How long does the main contractor have to fix the defect? And if they don't, when can you appoint another contractor to do that work for them? So that's kind of the key points of the defects period. What can be done is, if it's minor defects, nothing that is detrimental to the building and safety of people, and they are minor, it can be agreed that, right, for the first 8 months, these defects are sort of collected, they're listed, and say, right, at the end of 8 months, or at just a month before the end of the defects period, the main contractor would agree, we're going to do it all in one big hit. We're going to do all these minor things all in one go. And that's fair enough. But that is agreed and discussed between the client and the contractor, with the CA involved. Once the defects period is finished and all defects have been completed, then the CA will issue a final certificate which releases the retention fee, and that is the final payment to the contractor. And that's very broadly it really for handover and defects. Again, depending on the building contract and the procurement type, there may be certain notification periods, there may be certain certifications that need to be done, or processes to be followed to get to that final certificate. So be aware of them, but in a nutshell, very crudely, what I've described is the process. Additionally, there are, this stage of handover obviously triggers a few things. So, it's the project. You need to undertake sort of a review, begin to undertake a review of the project performance. You undertake commissioning. It's kind of, you also do a light touch on post-occupancy evaluation. And there may be some planning conditions that you still need to comply with that get resolved at this point. So I've mentioned feedback. Feedback's quite important because, you want to see how the project went. You want a true review from everyone, so that in your next project you can do things slightly better or more efficiently, or avoid certain issues that may have arisen that could have been avoided. Also, don't forget to review the REBA plan of works. Their template is really handy guide to key elements that they see as critical for each stage. So the next stage after handover is stage 7 is use, and is about undertaking post-occupancy evaluation of the building performance while it's in use. You're verifying project outcomes. Any feedback from the post-occupancy evaluation is important. You always want to learn. You update the building manual, which includes the health and safety file, and the fire safety information, which is critical. And, these are manuals that are constantly expanded and evolve during the life of the building, and get added to and adapted as and when they're needed. I think we'll talk in the next podcast briefly about dispute resolution. If you've enjoyed this podcast, then tune into the next one. If you'd like to know more, then by all means go to the Amazon website and purchase our ebook, which you can get in paperback as well, called Unofficial Guide to the Architectural Part 3 by LVP Architects. Thank you kindly for listening, and join me in the next podcast. See you then. Be